Well, I'm excited to get back into the series. This is one of my favorite lessons thus far in this series. Um, Not necessarily because it's uh, the best written lesson, even, and mostly because the topic is one that is the most mind boggling to me as far as lessons I learned during my time in college, taking Bible classes at Bryan. I remember being taught this, and it messed with my head. And so, what I'm going to say about this lesson is you may leave here a little more confused than you came, and that's okay. I think it's going to make a whole lot more sense to you by the end of this series. But by the end of today, I'm going to introduce you to some concepts that are kind of counterintuitive to what you have always learned, that are very strange and wild concepts, and we're going to talk them through. This is going to be a um, an interesting lesson, I hope, for you. It's going to be it was crazy for me, but honestly, hopefully you leave a little bit uncomfortable today, not in a bad way, but in a this is has opened my horizons to something new. So we are going to talk about something called the Divine Council today. Now, we talked last week about Satan's rebellion, and it is pretty well known that early on in Scripture there is a rebellion that happens against God. But that rebellion runs so much deeper than people realize. Most people think that the only rebellion is in the Garden of Eden. But that is just one of three different rebellions that occur in the first few chapters of the book of Genesis. And that rebellion sets the tone for Scripture, but they all three contribute to this greater concept of spiritual rebellion that's going to occur through the rest of the Bible. And so, in order to understand these rebellions, you've got to understand who the divine council is. Now, in Scripture, there is this concept known as the divine council. Now, you probably, if you're anything like me, have never heard of this concept. And the divine council is essentially God's staff team that we see mentioned throughout Scripture. That is a gross oversimplification, but we are going to see them appear multiple times in Scripture. So Psalm 89, 5 through 7, let's read it together. The heavens will praise your wonders, O Yahweh. Your faithfulness also is in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the sky is comparable to Yahweh? Who among the sons of the mighty is like Yahweh, a God greatly dreaded in the council of the holy ones, and fearsome above all those who are around him? Now, depending on your translation, you may see several different names for them. Heavenly beings might be one. Sons of the mighty or sons of God might be another. The actual Hebrew here, it translates to something along the lines of the sons of El. Now, El is a generic term for God. It was also used by the Canaanites outside of Scripture, just completely separate, culturally speaking, linguistically speaking. El is the term that the Canaanites used to describe their gods, or an individual god. In the same way as we have God with a lowercase g or God with an uppercase g, in English, El is kind of the equivalent word. Now, in some Canaanite texts, the chief god is referred to as El. This would be God with an uppercase G. Now, what is the plural of El? You might have heard this word before, but El is in plural form is Elohim. And Elohim translates to gods. So, for example, the Elohim of Egypt, or the gods of Egypt. And so you see Elohim as this plural term. Now, Elohim can also refer to multiple spiritual beings, such as a host of angels. Psalm 8, 4 through 5 says, "What is mankind that you are mindful of them, human beings that you care for them? You have made them a little lower than the angels or the Elohim, and crowned them with glory and honor." Now, how do we know that this does not mean gods? Well, because Hebrew translates it to angels. When the author quotes this verse, Hebrews 2, 5 through 8, "For he did not subject to the angels the world to come, concerning which we are speaking. But one has testified somewhere, saying, What is man that you remember him, or the Son of Man that you are concerned about him? You have made him for a little while lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, and you have appointed him over the works of your hands. You have put all things in subjection under his feet. For in subjecting all things to him, he left nothing that is not subject to him. But now we do not yet see all things subjected to him." Now God is sometimes referred to as El Elohim. And what does that translate to? Well, if El means God, Elohim is plural. You put the two together, you get the God of gods. And so sometimes he's referred to as El Elohim, sometimes he's referred to as El Elyon, which means the God Most High. And so when we put all these words together, they all mean sometimes means angels, sometimes means God, sometimes means gods. Sometimes you have God of gods, God Most High. All these words, they sound familiar. But to confuse matters more, God, Yahweh God, is sometimes referred to as Elohim. Now, that is why the angel of the Lord is sometimes called the angel of Elohim. If you remember from last week where we talked about angel of Elohim. Now, this doesn't mean the angel of gods. This actually means the angel of God still. Well, why does the plural mean the singular? Well, to use the plural term for God is a Hebrew technique that sometimes emphasizes God's grandeur and his power. It's also a technique, though, to show God's what? His plurality. The fact that he is three in one. So, why the Hebrew lesson? Why are we talking all about all these Hebrew words? They all mean similar things. Well, first, you need to understand that the Bible refers to God as the chief over all spiritual beings. These spiritual beings are sometimes referred to as angels, but sometimes it refers to a category of spiritual beings that is higher than regular angels. Second, you need to understand that these sons of God that we referred to at the beginning are actually some category of high spiritual being. The sons of God, they keep coming up in Scripture. Psalm 29, 1 through 2 says, "Ascribe to the Lord, you heavenly beings, sons of God. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendors of his holiness." So we see the sons of God, heavenly beings, are mentioned here. But one of the most interesting appearances where we see that phrase, the sons of God, happen is in the book of Job. Now, Job, remember, God makes a bet with Satan in this book at the beginning, and the book starts out in verse 6. It says, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and the adversary also came among them." Now, many translations just translate this as angels, when the angels came to present themselves before the Lord. But the Hebrew there, the actual Hebrew, is not just the word for angels. The Hebrew specifically uses this phrase, sons of God. Now, God has this meeting with the divine council, as we talked about, sons of God are the divine council, and Satan shows up in the middle. He crashes his meeting. And if it isn't clear if Satan is included on this council, or if he just kind of crashes the party, but the sons of God and Satan all show up to talk to God here in the story. Now, the sons of God, they're mentioned elsewhere in Job as well. This is not the only instance we see. In Job 38, much later in the book, verses 4 through 7, we see, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if you have understanding. Who has determined its measurements? If you know, or who has stretched the line upon it? To what are its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. So the sons of God, according to this verse here, were present at creation. God's looking at Job and he's saying, hey, when the morning stars and angels are often referred to as the same, or celestial, spiritual beings, and angels and stars, they're all kind of synonymous of each other. And all the sons of God shouted for joy. They were present at creation. That does not mean they were not created, but it means that at the creation of the universe, they were there. And again, this is often translated as angels, but that's not, again, what the Hebrew says specifically. It says sons of God. This term keeps popping up. So why are they referred to as the divine council? Well, elsewhere in Scripture, we see them referred to as the council of the Lord or the divine council, are not just mentioned as sons of God. Jeremiah 23:18 says, but which of them has stood in the counsel of the Lord to see or to hear his word? Who has listened and heard his word? So how do we know that these are the same figures? Well, Psalm 82 verse 1 says, God stands among the divine council. He renders judgment among the gods, or the Elohim. So God, here is the term, the divine council. And so we see Elohim is used in the same way, the sons of Elohim. And these two parallel lines indicate that the divine council and the sons of God are the same group. But this is re-emphasized again in the verse we read at the very beginning of this lesson, Psalm 89. The heavens will praise your wonders, O Yahweh, your faithfulness also in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the sky is comparable to Yahweh? Who among the sons of God is like Yahweh? A God greatly dreaded in the council of the holy ones, and fearsome above all those who are around him. So who are the sons of God, or the divine council? This is mysterious figures. I keep talking about them. I keep quoting these verses to you about them. But who are they? Well, they are spiritual beings that are either a high class of angels or they rank above the angels, and they're effectively deities in Scripture. Now, here's the point where you're probably like, hold up, Caleb, what are you talking about? And you should have that response, because this is hard to grasp. We are always told, we grow up being told there is only one God, and that God is Yahweh. And I'm not actually disagreeing with that per se. But you do have to remember that the Bible also calls God the El Elohim, or the God of what? Gods. But what about the Ten Commandments, right? We grew up hearing this quote in Exodus and in Deuteronomy. Let's look at the Deuteronomy version here in chapter 5, verses 7 through 9. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, any likeness of that what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in that water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, Yahweh your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, and on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. In the Ten Commandments, God specifically says not to worship other gods. And that indicates that beings existed who the Israelites might be tempted to worship. He also says not to build idols in the image of anything that exists in heaven above. So the fact that he's saying don't build an idol, don't build a statue and worship it, of something that actually exists in heaven, of these gods. Now, what the Bible, and I want to hear it to be loud and clear when I say this, what the Bible does not say is that these beings are equal to God. They are created beings. They are spiritual beings who were created while they were present at the creation of the universe. They are still created. There is only one uncreated being, and it is Yahweh. But these beings exist, and the Bible calls them gods. And the Bible's very, very clear. They do not deserve worship. You are not to worship them. And I know that the feeling of this and the reason this feels so uncomfortable is because this feels pagan. We talk about these other gods. And and so I want to be very clear. The Bible is not saying that they are deserving of worship. In fact, these spiritual beings are deities that are referred to throughout history as gods, but they are still lower than Yahweh. And so what we are going to see, and I've just introduced you to them in this lesson, things are going to start making more sense in the coming few lessons. And by the end of the series specifically, everything should make much more sense. But right now, we are going to see that these sons of God, they play a significant role in the rebellion, the spiritual rebellion, and they take on the image of false gods that we see in Scripture and even in mythology. And that these sons of gods take on this role. They role play in a sense. They're like children who dress up as gods, but they're created beings, and they try and take authority from God, as we're going to see. However, the Bible, whether they are angels or higher than angels within the spiritual hierarchy, that's unclear, but they do and are called, they do take on and they are called actual gods with a lowercase g. So this is hard to grasp. I understand if you're confused by the end of this. The first time one of my Bible teachers brought this concept up to me, I immediately was like, no, not willing to accept this. But the more I studied, the more it made sense of Scripture, the more it fit, the more I couldn't deny the fact that the Bible used this language. And so if you're uncomfortable right now, that's okay. But what I want you to know is that it will make more sense, I hope, by the end of the series, especially within the next two lessons, what we're looking at here. So, wild concepts been introduced. I don't have time to go into all of them right now, but we are going to cover them in the next few lessons. So if you have questions, feel free to talk to me about them. Reach out to me, give me a call, shoot me a text, whatever you need to. I'm excited to talk about this. This is one of my favorite rabbit trails to go down in Scripture right here, even though it started as something that very much confused me. So reach out if you have any questions. As always, I'll see you next week.